On this Thursday night, the RCMP's offer to the WoodSoitan. The Mounties offer to meet a key demand.
I do not believe it.
As new blockades pop up and WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs meet with Mohawks. From one quarantine to another.
I just want to be in Canada.
The next wave of Canadians flying back, and what happens to the Diamond Princess cruise ship now? Addicted and imprisoned.
The system is set up to send me back.
One man's battle to break a vicious cycle. Plus, the radio producer and the prisoner.
My first reaction to that was like, oh my God, this guy's a monster.
A Canadian man's surprising connection with a Guantanamo Bay detainee.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After weeks of illegal blockades of railway lines in support of a group of WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs, there's still no resolution in sight. There is an offer on the table, though, to meet one of their demands. The RCMP have offered to leave their outpost on a road in WoodSoitan territory, the one where arrests took place earlier this month, as long as that road remains clear. The federal government hopes it clears the way for a peaceful resolution.
Everyone wants to take the air out of this balloon in the most controlled way. The problem is most people are coming up with us with a pin, and that isn't the right solution.
You got what you wanted? They're leaving? So we should not blockade this route.
Right now, there is no solution, just growing anger. This blockade is on the main line between Quebec City, Montreal, and the U.S. It's blocking via passenger trains and CN freight trains. CN did get an injunction today to dismantle it, and Quebec's premier says police will act on it.
This is ridiculous. It's not the same as blocking in Kanesatake or on a First Nations land. You're blocking the major artery to get into our city.
And in BC, a blockade has been set up east of Kamloops on land belonging to the Nesconlith Band. It's affecting CP rail lines. The RCMP are on the scene there. The other development today involves a group of WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs who have traveled from northern BC to southern Ontario. They're the ones who object to the natural gas pipeline going through their territory. A sharp contrast to the other chiefs and elected band councils who support it. We'll get to all of that in just a moment, but first, Eric Sorensen on what, if any, progress was made today.
2 weeks after arrests in BC triggered Indigenous standoffs across the country, the RCMP have offered to leave their outpost on the WoodSoitan territory and pull back to their detachment in Houston, BC, if the entire Service Road area stays open. A breakthrough?
They've listened to the concerns that were raised by the hereditary chiefs and by the community, and I think they've responded in a very appropriate way.
For the government, it would be a welcome opening as a way to end the blockades that have paralyzed rail transportation in parts of the country.
These are opportunities to come to a peaceful resolution, which is what we've always aimed for from the beginning.
The RCMP pullout is a core demand of the WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs. One band member, part of an earlier formal RCMP complaint, reacted to the potential pullback with skepticism.
I do not believe it, and I won't believe it until literally they have moved out. In WoodSoitan territory, we've had a pretty long history of poor treatment by the RCMP.
What remains unclear is the level of support among the WoodSoitan for the protests versus those for the Coastal GasLink project. Some don't support the blockade.
The blockades across Canada are not helping. They are further dividing our country. They're further dividing Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples.
The federal Conservatives have taken a hard line. They believe the protesters are now being rewarded.
So what concessions is this government contemplating to the lawbreakers, and how much more lawbreaking does this government plan to encourage?
The Trudeau government's tone is very different.
We understand on this side of the House that reconciliation remains a priority not just for our government but for all Canadians.
A separate question is the precedent it would set. If the RCMP, the frontline police force, steps back, what would it mean for the pipeline project, and under what conditions would the RCMP step back in? Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Every day the blockades remain in place, the more the frustration builds. And now the WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs at the heart of this impasse have gone south to join the blockade on the Tyendinaga Mohawk territory in Ontario. It's causing mass disruptions to Canadian rail traffic. Global's Mike Le Couteur is in Tyendinaga today. Mike, what do we know about what the WoodSoitan hereditary chiefs are doing there?
Well, Dawna, we're hearing that the WoodSoit and hereditary chiefs are spending 2 days with the Mohawks here, and then they'll be spending 2 days in Kahnawake to spend time with members of that community. And the goal of this trip is to thank them for their support and solidarity, but also to chart a path forward. The report suggests Friday will start with a tobacco burning at sunrise at the Mohawk Council House here on the territory. And then at 10 a.m. there'll be a meeting with the local council to discuss what are being called political issues. Media and police are being told to stay away from that session, while all other Mohawks are welcome. Now, as for here in Tyendinaga, the people camped out at the rails seem ready to stay for as long as it takes. Now, we tried to speak with the demonstrators to get a sense of how they are feeling, and you can tell that tensions are running high, as we were told in no uncertain terms that they didn't want to talk to us, and we were to return where the rest of the media have been observing for weeks. Now, it's a sharp contrast to even a few days ago when they were more open. And that's perhaps an indication of where we are in this standoff, as all sides are hoping for a resolution and are frustrated that one hasn't come yet. Now, we did see people coming and going over the course of the day, and many of them bringing food and coffee to the demonstrators, just like these two twin sisters from a neighboring town.
Well, it's not really a blockade. No, they've never blocked the track. It's just Indigenous people trying to get other people to understand that they have rights that have been trampled on for centuries.
Now, the sisters who have been coming here on nearly a daily basis tell us that the Mohawks are in good spirits, but like everyone, they hope that this comes to a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. Dawna?
Mike Le Couteur in Tyendinaga Territory in Ontario, thanks. There's been a deadly development involving that cruise ship in Japan infected with the new coronavirus. Authorities say 2 elderly passengers have now died, and their deaths mark another grim turn in what's been a disastrous few weeks on the Diamond Princess. Despite being under quarantine, more than 630 people have contracted the virus. About 200 Canadians who were on the ship are now on a flight back to Canada. As Mike Armstrong reports, dozens of other Canadians who tested positive for COVID-19 have been left behind.
We're only supposed to be in on vacation now.
It's been a surreal 2 weeks for Ariel Trudel. His parents have been stuck on the Diamond Princess, posting pictures on Facebook. These were taken Thursday as the couple was moved off the ship to a hospital. His father's tested positive for COVID-19. Trudel says he wishes sick Canadians were included in the repatriation flight, that they'd be better off being treated here.
Yeah, in quarantine in Canada, yes, for sure. 100%.
Finally. Several countries are now bringing back their citizens. This was an Australian couple leaving the Diamond Princess. The Canadian flight is headed to Trenton, Ontario, with about 200 people on board. Global News spoke to a New Brunswick couple on the bus headed to the airport. They're facing 14 more days in quarantine in Cornwall, Ontario, but they're not complaining.
Oh, I just want to be in Canada. Even though I'm not going to be at home in Fredericton, just to be in Canada is going to be great.
As the ship empties out, questions are still swirling about how the virus spread. What started with a handful of cases turned into more than 16% of the ship infected. A Japanese infectious diseases expert who criticized protocols has now pulled his video. Kentaro Iwata told reporters Thursday it served its purpose. But Iwata has been criticized in the Japanese legislature. The government says it's done its best and has been correcting problems daily. The president of Princess Cruises visited passengers leaving the ship. Now, when it's empty, it will be out of commission. The plan is to move the Diamond Princess to dry dock and give it what's being called a full sanitizing. They expect it back in the water by the beginning of May, once again, with passengers. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
In China, authorities are reporting a drop in new cases of COVID-19. They say just over 400 new cases were confirmed on Friday. The drop appears to be partly due to more changes in the way patients are diagnosed. In nearby South Korea, authorities are in crisis mode as the virus begins to spread there. 31 new cases were confirmed in South Korea today, bringing the total to 104, and one person has died. A vast majority of the new cases there are linked to a fringe religious group in the city of Daegu. The group, which has been accused of being a cult, says it's temporarily shut its doors to help stop the spread. The city's mayor, though, is taking no chances. He's called the outbreak an unprecedented crisis, and he's urging everyone in the city of 2.5 million people to stay indoors. Roger Stone, the longtime political strategist and friend of President Trump, has been sentenced to 40 months in prison, much less than the 7 to 9 years prosecutors had originally asked for. Stone was convicted of lying to protect Trump, and Trump then said he thought Stone should be exonerated. As Jackson Proskow reports, the question now is whether President Trump will step in again to try to save his friend.
He lied and intimidated witnesses to protect the president. For that, political bad boy Roger Stone will spend 40 months in jail, less time than recommended after the U.S. Attorney General overruled prosecutors and after the president complained about the sentence Stone originally faced.
9 years for doing something that nobody even can define what he did.
Judge Amy Berman Jackson said that her decision was not motivated by politics, saying Stone was not prosecuted for standing up for the president. He was prosecuted for covering up for the president.
Roger has a very good chance of exoneration, in my opinion.
Trump responded by attacking the jurors who found Stone guilty, suggesting the case will be overturned on appeal.
I want the process to play out. I think that's the best thing to do.
The worst-kept secret in Washington is that Roger Stone will all but certainly receive a full presidential pardon. Donald Trump has made it clear in recent days that he plans to stand by his longtime political advisor, a man convicted of trying to stymie the investigation into Russian election interference. It's already been a good week for friends of Trump, with a slew of pardons and commutations.
I want to kiss my wife and my daughters. And
the former governor of Illinois and the former New York City police commissioner among them. A pardon for Stone would carry a different kind of weight. He's the 6th presidential associate convicted in the wake of the Mueller probe, but his case has become a lightning rod for Trump's grievances with the investigation into his campaign. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
As the Democrats whittle down who will be their candidate to go up against Donald Trump, they're holding a series of debates. Last night was the first appearance for billionaire businessman and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He took a beating from his Democratic rivals, who questioned his extreme wealth and his record on how he's treated women and racial minorities.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
Elizabeth Warren went on to accuse Bloomberg of muzzling his accusers with non-disclosure agreements. The billionaire had been rising in the polls after mounting a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign. Germany is in mourning tonight. Coming up, the shooting rampages being treated as far-right terrorism. Plus, you can thank this man every time you cut and paste. 3 teenagers face a number of charges after a violent armed bank robbery in Markham, Ontario. It happened at a Royal Bank branch last night. Police allege the boys, aged 13, 15, and 16, were armed with guns and knives. 2 bank employees were stabbed. 2 other people were kicked in the face, injuries that are all non-life-threatening. Investigators say they have evidence connecting the 3 teenage boys to other unsolved robberies throughout the Greater Toronto area. Germany has suffered one of its worst mass shootings Wednesday night. A man suspected of links to far-right extremist groups attacked 2 shisha bars, killing at least 9 people. The attacks, which have been labeled acts of domestic terror, happened about 10 p.m. in a town 25 kilometers from Frankfurt. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says there are many signs the attacker acted out of racism. Police say the 43-year-old suspect killed himself at home. He was found dead next to the body of his mother. Prosecutors say the man posted a manifesto on the internet with a deeply racist attitude days before the attacks. Well, you probably use what he invented almost every day, but you don't know it. Now's your chance to pay tribute to Larry Tesler, who has died at the age of 74. Tesler was a pioneer of early computing and believed computers should be for everyone. His most famous invention is the cut, copy, and paste command, which he came up with while working at Xerox. It was based on the old method of editing in which people physically cut portions of the text and glued them elsewhere. Tesler was recruited by Steve Jobs at Apple and rose to be that company's chief scientist. Xerox said today, "Your workday is easier thanks to his revolutionary ideas." Still ahead, when mental illness and the legal system intersect, an intimate look through the lens of one man's struggle. The number of people who are incarcerated and struggle with serious mental health and addiction issues is on the rise. For many, interacting with the legal system can be a vicious cycle, dealing with relapses and moving in and out of prison. One man caught up in that cycle has shared his story with Global News. We've been following Elliot Hudson's case for a year and a half. Here's Abigail Beeman with part 1 of our series, Addicted and Imprisoned.
Elliot Hudson gets some macaroni and cheese started for dinner.
People are going to see me and they're going to say, that guy looks pretty normal. I can relate to, what he looks like. He looks like somebody I could have went to high school with.
That's part of why he's opening up, to break the stigma around addictions and mental illness. Anyone can be affected. For more than 2 decades, since his teens, he's been struggling. Drugs, alcoholism, bipolar disorder, and anxiety.
2 assault charges. There was assault police.
In total, Hudson says he has 9 convictions.
One night, the mental torture was so bad that I thought, either I'm going to jump off the bridge into the Ottawa River, or I can just try and get as high and drunk as possible to blot it out.
In 2017, he went from being a master's student to homeless, so desperate for money to feed his addiction, he robbed 2 places, landing him in jail for the first time.
6 months? Yeah, it feels like a long time from where I'm sitting.
Global News first met Hudson in jail. Once he got out, it took just a few days before he broke his parole conditions. Getting drunk and then coming clean about it with his parole officer was enough to land him back behind bars.
Once I had, disclosed that I had drank, she had no choice. The system is set up to send me back.
And the criminalization of addiction is something Hudson says needs to change. He feels fortunate to have served about half of his nearly 2 years behind bars in this Brockville, Ontario treatment centre. But with only 100 beds, he got more help than many others.
So I've been out, today's my 5th day.
In October, Hudson was released, trying to rebuild a life, nervous about relapse.
I'm really grateful to have a comfortable space to sleep. Like I said, when I crawl into bed at night, I think about the guys that are sleeping in shelters. I woke up clean and sober this morning. I have no intentions of using today, and hopefully I go to bed the same way, and then I rinse and repeat.
Hudson was able to stay sober for about a month. But when Global News met with him last week...
I've been drinking sporadically. It's not continuous at this point, but it's enough to be concerning. I can't be the person I was meant to be when I'm drinking and using.
He knows recovery doesn't happen overnight, and he knows his story isn't unique. Hudson hopes sharing it may give others like him a voice, one that so often goes unheard. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Those who work with people like Elliot Hudson say one of the biggest challenges people like him face is stigma about their addiction and lack of understanding about treatment. Tomorrow, Abigail Beeman looks at how things need to change. That's in part 2 of our series, Addicted and Imprisoned. Next, the unique connection between a Toronto radio producer and an alleged Al-Qaeda explosives expert. Imagine discovering someone who shares exactly the same name as you. That's kind of freaky itself, but this next story takes that coincidence many steps further. A Canadian radio producer not only discovered his namesake, he traced his story all the way to Guantanamo Bay, the detention facility set up by the U.S. during the War on Terror. And as Jeff Semple reports, it turned into a fascinating 3-year journey.
Latif Nasser isn't a name you hear every day. In fact, for a long time, this radio producer from Toronto thought he was the only one. Until 3 years ago.
This was the first time I'd ever found someone with my name, and he happens to be in the most notorious prison on earth. This was the tweet that just launched me on this entire investigation.
Nasser was idly scrolling through Twitter when he came across this tweet, mentioning his name in a letter to the President of the United States.
And I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. I read the letter and I soon discovered it wasn't about me. It was about a guy who had my name, who happened to be detainee 244 at Guantanamo Bay.
The tweet was from a human rights group calling for the release of Abdul Latif Nasser, locked up at Guantanamo Bay detention camp since 2002. According to this leaked U.S. government document, Nasser was accused of being a top military advisor to Osama bin Laden.
My first reaction to that was like, oh my God, this guy's a monster. I just had this morbid curiosity. I needed to know everything about him I possibly could.
Nasser spent the next 3 years investigating his namesake's story, interviewing the man's lawyer, traveling to Guantanamo and Morocco to meet his family. And the more he learned, the more that monster moniker didn't seem to fit.
The more I dug into this guy's life, I found that we started in similar places. He was a nerdy Muslim kid from the suburbs.
His lawyer says he's endured years of torture despite never being charged with a crime. In fact, in 2016, U.S. authorities actually approved Nasser's release, but that was before the election of President Donald Trump.
He's really stuck in limbo. Nobody in the current administration is going to be willing to sign off on transferring him entirely for political reasons.
This is the other Latif. I'm Latif Nasser.
Nasser is now releasing a podcast detailing the other Latif's story, based on dozens of interviews with friends, family, military, and intelligence officials. But the one person he couldn't speak with was the man himself.
It almost feels like the only place this guy has ever gotten a trial is in my garage. We're going through this in this meticulous way that I don't think anybody else ever has before. And that isn't the way this is supposed to work.
Jeff Semple, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is the view from Mount Seymour in North Vancouver, BC. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to us. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.